Hello everyone, it's Clarissa, and today I'm going to be doing my August wrap-up and my September TBR, so yeah, let's get started. So I think I'm going to be talking about each book in the order that I read them rather than the rating, because that's just how I feel like doing it. So the month of August, I read a total of 4 books, which is pretty good. Definitely not as much as I read in July because of the booktubeathon. I'm pretty proud of myself, and all of these books were 3 stars and above, so I wasn't totally disappointed with any of them, but I'm just going to talk about what I read kind of briefly because I've already mentioned them in like past videos. But yeah, this was the first book that I read in August, which was the Book of Lost Things. And this was the first kind of fantasy book that I've read in a long time. So it was a really good book for me to kind of get more acquainted with that genre. But this book surrounds a lot of old folklore and fairy tales, which is something that I'm really interested in. So yeah, I think that's why I picked it up, and it's about a 12-year-old boy named David, and he's living in London during World War II. So there's also that kind of historical fiction aspect to it, which is why I also picked it up. But it makes the book like really old-timey, and like I just love books that center around World War II. I just find it like a really fascinating time period. That kind of aspect in it also really made the book really interesting. David is transported to a world where fairy tales come to life, and he's being hunted down by all of these like weird hybrids of wolves and humans, and it's just like really adventurous. I never got sick of it, and I was never bored, and I was like always on the edge of my seat. And I think I would classify this book as one of those books that really allows you to visualize what's going on. Like, I felt like I was watching a movie when I was reading this, which is not easy to do as an author, really. It's very vivid in detail, very imaginative, and I loved the world building. And yeah, I feel like this book isn't really talked about a lot either on BookTube, so I would highly recommend this if you're not really like a fan of high fantasy but still want a little bit of magic in your life. Definitely recommend this. The second book I read was The Glass Castle, which is a memoir written by author Jeanette Walls. I read this because the movie came out, I think, mid-August. When did it come out? I don't remember, but I just remember seeing the trailer for the movie and being like, hey, I read some chapters of that in 8th grade and I never finished it. So I picked up this book and read it quickly before the movie came out. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews of this, like, on Goodreads. A lot of people say it's amazing and it's like such a moving story, and other people say that there are parts in the book that are boring or dull. So I found that this book did have moments where it did seem kind of slow, but I do think that that kind of adds more to her memoir because it is true to her life. And I mean, not everyone's life is exciting every single second of the day, no matter how interesting Jeanette Walls' life is. So I thought that everything in this book was extremely realistic and not sugar-coated at all. I really enjoyed how Jeanette portrayed her parents and her father especially. She didn't really put him in a totally positive light, but not a totally negative light either. And I think that that really is true with describing characters, especially of parents. It really allowed her to stay true to herself and really make it as authentic as possible. So yeah, I really like this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5, and it really gave me a lot of perspective, I think. So yeah. The next book that I read was Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. I was on a really big mystery kick this month. I was really craving some good mystery, so I picked up some Agatha Christie because she never lets you down. This book is one of her most famous books, I think, and for good reason. This story has probably been used in like hundreds of TV shows and spin-offs, so she definitely deserves all this recognition because I really like this book. It's really short. I wish it was longer. That's not really a criticism, that's like a good thing, you know? This book basically follows 10 people who are invited onto an island called Soldier's Island, and they're all brought there for different reasons. So they don't really know each other when they get there, but it turns out that they're all invited from the same person, and this said person is a very mysterious person. So they don't really know who he is, they don't know why they're there, and people just start dying. They eventually figure out that the murderer must be among them, so it's just a lot of tension and good old mystery. The last book that I finished in August was Emma by Jane Austen. I don't really know what to say, but this was definitely not one of my favorite Jane Austen books. I don't know if it was just because I didn't like Emma as much as her other protagonists, but I know in my summer favorites video I mentioned this book as one of my summer favorites, and that was because I hadn't finished the book yet, which was a mistake by me. But I finished this book and it didn't really go how I wanted it to go. I was expecting something a lot different. If you've read this book, maybe you know what. This basically is about a girl named Emma, and she is a matchmaker, sort of. So she likes matching up people and kind of like intervening in people's business, which I thought was really interesting at first. I was like, wow, this character is like kind of weird. Like, I've never really seen that in old-timey books. It's basically a book about young people and love and trying to find love. I have no idea, but fun fact, I found out that Clueless is a spin-off of this book, and it made so much sense to me. Like, after reading this, I was like, this is really familiar to a movie that I've watched, and it was Clueless. And from then, I kind of like figured out like how the ending would go. So yeah, that kind of ruined it for me, but I thought that was interesting. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and yeah, that's all I gotta say. So now for my TBR. Since I'm starting high school in like a few weeks, I'm not really giving myself a lot of books to read over the month, but I have 3 books here. I find that with giving myself smaller TBRs, I'm not as pressured to kind of stick by them. It gives me a lot of room to kind of try new books if I have time. So the first book that I picked up here is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I have seen so many people talk about this book on BookTube, on like any social media actually, and I just like wanted to be part of the conversation. Like, I felt so left out, and this is kind of like an instance of where I feel really out of the loop with like what everyone else is reading, because I just like never read what's relevant, you know? So I thought I'd pick this up. I've heard it compared to Harry Potter, which, I mean, basically I think this is a world where there are 4 types of... Wait, what is this book about? I don't even know. So there's like Grey London, White London, Red London, and Black London, and there's a character named Cal, and he's a red traveler, so he's able to kind of travel between the different Londons, and he's kind of like an ambassador, so he's like a diplomatic person, and there's a lot of adventure, I guess, and magic, and it seems interesting. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. The next book I picked up a few days ago was The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I'm very, very excited to read this. I'm planning on reading this first thing in September. Donna Tartt is actually the author of The Goldfinch, which is why I picked this up. And it's basically a book about a group of students and their classics professor. They kind of form a society that kind of utilizes a new way of thinking, I guess. It sounds very philosophical, and I just love books that revolve around those 2 things. So this seems really good. And it says here in the summary that they are at risk of corruption and betrayal, and at last inexorably into evil, which sounds really interesting. But like the concept of like what's good and what's bad, like that just sounds really interesting to me. So I'm really excited to read this, and yeah. The last book that I have here, I've already read before, and it's Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, but I got the book in this nice, sleek Penguins Classic Edition to add to my collection. This book is basically a romance book between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, and it's really good. I'll put like a little summary here because my summaries really suck. I might read this if I have time, because I'm not really sure how much time I have to read because of college and stuff, but we'll see where it goes. I find that this will be like a nice read if I'm ever like in the mood to read something familiar. So yeah. So that is all for my wrap up and TBR. Leave any suggestions below if you have any book recommendations or opinions that you find were different from mine. I'm really eager to see like other people's like thoughts about these books. So yeah, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!